Elizabeth. I know you're going to hear from Paul McAllister. Paul has served in churches, also does organizing, is engaged inside of the ecclesial part of society, and also involved in the business and governmental side. And his insights, I think, are very helpful, and you're going to really enjoy Paul McAllister.
I honestly think that our state legislature is meddling far too significantly in the lives of women and decisions that need to be made between them and their physicians, and also decisions that need to be made in a very private and personal manner. And it's one thing to want to protect the health of women, but this is not about health, similar to bills that dealt with all reproductive rights have really not addressed the health concerns of women. If these were the motivating factors, then you would see a different type of conversation. You would probably have more cooperation between both sides of the aisle, meaning those who are legislating against certain things and those who are legislating for. But these seem to be very unilateral, polarizing, highly conflicted arguments that are being made that are deeply distressing to women and their communities. So
Paul,
I really feel, Doug, um, that the faith community needs to come together on this issue because it's about power, it's about control over women, it's about restricting access, and it's about limiting individual rights. This is the overarching argument that we're addressing when we talk about Senate Bill 20.
yeah, and that's one of the big issues that is the that brought this to the forefront is that Clarence Thomas wrote a concurring opinion in the Dobbs decision, saying that the very justification for overturning Roe versus Wade was that the privacy clause was not the proper argument. And then he went on to write, and the right to contraception, which caused a lot of people to say, well, then we need to start preparing for states to support the rights if it's possible that the Supreme Court's going to follow the lead of the longest serving justice, that right to contraception needs to be a state's issue.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm deeply distressed by the fact that these bills are that Clarence Thomas wrote about in the Dobbs decision are confronting same-sexual relationships, whether one agrees or disagrees, um, same-sex marriage, and the premise upon which these individual decisions in a democracy individuals should have the right to make. And so the um, this kind of deployment of individual personal morality into law is problematic in a democracy. And what we see is there's not a coming together on these issues. There's a great divide that is further splintering the body politic in ways that cannot be useful, that cannot be helpful in a pluralistic society. And so if you talk about even racial equality and the right to marry someone of a different race, look at Clarence Thomas himself, and you see there is an obvious an obvious hypocrisy associated with many of these rulings. They cannot stand, they cannot be reflective of where we are today versus where we were in 1970, the
Mm-hmm.
early 70s with the Loving decision. We thought we were past all of that. But what we find ourselves experiencing is this regressive, retractive, reductionist way of thinking that does not move the culture forward and is not reflective of what we have learned since 50, 60 years ago.
And on this particular issue, it's a curious one because it's one that most faith communities also never talk about. They don't talk about contraception, birth control, family planning inside of many churches. Has that been your experience in church, or have you had a different experience in churches you've attended and churches that you've led where they've addressed issues of birth control, contraception, and so on?
You know, we have had the privilege of attending many different congregations and many different denominations down through the years. And I would say that conversations on contraception have largely been considered to be personal, private matters, from conservative churches to liberal churches to white churches, Hispanic churches, African American churches. It has always been um, the domain of families to make these personal decisions. These are intimate decisions, and they should not be legislated by conservative lawmakers or liberal lawmakers, for that matter, in legal venues. These things should be decided by the people for themselves.
Mhm.
It's deeply troubling to me, Doug, that we even have to have this kind of conversation, and it makes you wonder what it bodes for the respect for human dignity and human decency that many of these legislators who are passing these laws have for people of color, because ultimately this is the target audience, poor people who are white and black, but also women of color and their communities at large. And so this is part of the onslaught of the attack on these particular communities. And what needs to be done is faith communities need to understand the issues more collectively and come together across the board and resist uh, these
Yeah.
these kinds of laws.
You're going to continue to hear this refrain through three more guests that we're going to have here on the webinar. Really appreciate what Paul had to say there, that these are issues that communities need to be engaged in, and we need to allow people the freedoms that they expect in this country.